A big platter like these could be handy the next time you're entertaining or when the holiday season rolls around. And I'll bet there's someone in your life who would appreciate receiving a platter you've turned yourself. Well, the good news is, if you can turn a bowl, you can turn a platter in any number of different styles. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to make one like this. Now, turning a platter this big is going to require a lathe with significant swing over bed. And I was able to tackle it using Laguna's 1524 mid-size lathe equipped with its optional bed extension expansion kit. The lathe features a movable headstock, just like many full-size lathes, so you can slide it down to work over the tailstock end of the bed. This 20-inch cast iron bed extension bolts to the end of the lathe's bed, and in the lower position, it increases the swing over bed from 15 inches to more than 20 inches. The expansion kit also includes this angled tool rest support base. It raises the tool rest up to the spindle height and provides greater range of motion while also keeping the banjo out of the way for oversized turning. Now, when you think about it, a platter is really just a bowl laid flat. It's got an outer profile that needs to be shaped, as well as a base or a foot. Now, I'm going to make this base large enough so that my platter doesn't tip over easily when it's upright. The interior has a rim that you can make as wide as you like, and there's a contoured recess of some sort. Or you might decide to leave this area mostly flat, depending upon how much stock thickness you have to work with. I turned these three platters from a plank of 17-inch wide, 8/4 ambrosia maple. So that's what I'm going to use again. And I'll be using just basic bowl turning tools: a faceplate, a 4-jawed chuck, a 5/8-inch bowl gouge with a swept back grind, various scrapers, and a parting tool. Now, if you prefer to use carbide insert turning tools, those will work too. And of course, wear a face shield and some form of respirator whenever you're working at the lathe. Now let's get to it. I started by marking my blank to its overall diameter so I could cut it round at the bandsaw. And then here, I'm installing my faceplate on what will be the inside of the platter. I'm using number 10 screws and driving them into every hole of the faceplate. A blank this big is definitely one you don't want to have fly off the lathe, so make sure the faceplate is securely mounted to it. And if your faceplate has screws that lock it to the lathe spindle, be sure to tighten those too. Better safe than sorry. With the lathe set to a low speed, my first task was to flatten the outside of the blank with my bowl gouge to begin to true it up. Truing it helps to reduce vibration on the lathe and will let me work at a higher speed. Using dried board stock for a platter is hard on cutting edges, so throughout the process, sharpen your tools often whenever they begin to cut poorly. I'll resharpen this bowl gouge at least a half a dozen times or more before this platter is done. And now that the outside face of the blank is flat, I can mark the mortise for my 4-jawed chuck and the outside diameter of the foot. Here, I'm hollowing out the mortise for my 4-jawed chuck using a flat profile carbide turning tool. It only has to be about 3/16 of an inch deep to provide plenty of holding power. And now I'm forming a dovetailed recess for my chuck jaws using an angled scraping tool. And now that the mortise for the chuck is done, I can true up the edge of the blank. This will bring it into round and help to further balance it. It also enables me to pencil on a guideline that'll mark the top edge of the platter's rim. And now, with the lathe dialed up to a higher speed, I can form the platter's outer curved profile between the foot and the rim layout lines. I remove the waste with ordinary bevel rubbing push cuts with my bowl gouge. My goal here is to create a gradual flowing curve from bottom to top, as well as to form a foot that's about 1/4 inch or so tall. This is a lot of stock to remove, so be sure to stop now and then to resharpen your gouge when it feels like it's heating up too quickly or cutting poorly. That'll help to reduce tear out and enable the tool to cut more easily. Once you've got the platter's outside profile the way you want it, it's time to clean up the surface. And I do that by scraping with my bowl gouge with the flutes turned inward to remove any deep tear out and to further refine the shape. Then I sand up to 220 grit. And during the sanding process, I insulate my fingers with a piece of white abrasive pad behind the sandpaper to keep from burning my fingertips. It really helps. Well, that takes care of the platter's outside profile at this stage. So now I can work on the inside face. And the setup involves unscrewing the faceplate, installing my 4-jaw chuck on the spindle, and mounting the platter to it. Make sure to tighten the chuck securely in the platter's bottom mortise. Now the first step to turning the inside face of the platter is to flatten it, removing material down to the rim layout line as I've done here. Then I remove some material at the center of the platter to establish its overall depth. Now I'm going to keep this platter a 1/2 inch thick at the center, and I can determine that pretty easily using a couple of rulers. Then, after I marked a line for the rim's width, I could get to work excavating the platter's interior with my bowl gouge. Try to do this in long, sweeping, shallow strokes, and remember to stop and sharpen as needed to make it easier on yourself. Now as you're hollowing out this interior, be sure to periodically stop and check the wall thickness to make sure it's staying even and not getting too thin in places. If you turn a lot of bowls, you'll probably just do that by hand as you go along. But you can also gauge the wall thickness using an inside-outside calipers like this. After I had the waste removed down to the deepest point, I could clean up the interior and rim with a combination of scraping cuts with my bowl gouge and a round nose scraper. Then it was on to sanding up to 220 grit. Well, that's it for the interior. But there's one last detailing step I like to do on bowls that I'm going to do on this platter. And that is to remove this chucking mortise from the foot. I think it's a nice finishing touch, and it takes away all evidence of the turning process. To do it, I mount an oversized faceplate to the lathe made of scrap plywood that's a couple of inches larger than the platter. Then I turn a shallow, flat-bottomed recess into it that matches the outside diameter of the platter, and I make it at least as wide as the platter's rim. Now be sure to cut that recess in the faceplate carefully so when you press the platter's rim into it, you get a good friction fit. Now, if I could use my tailstock to support this setup, I would, but this lower outboard bed extension doesn't allow me to do that. So to make sure the platter doesn't come off, I'm using long strips of duct tape instead. It works just fine, but use plenty of tape just to be safe. Now I can turn away the dovetailed edge of the mortise and shape the whole interior of the foot into a gentle concave curve. Go easy on these cuts, especially if you use a scraper. Then give the foot a final sanding to complete it. Once the foot's done, so is this platter. Of course, this is really a simple example. You might decide to experiment with different rim styles or interior treatments, or make the outside profile concave instead of convex. Maybe you'll decide to create a deeper well in the middle for food dips or salsa, but the choice and creativity is entirely up to you. Whatever you decide, I hope you enjoy the process of making your platters because, after all, any chance to do some wood turning is a good day in the shop. I'm Chris Marshall with Woodworkers Journal magazine, and thanks for watching.